Good morning. This is the Como Vanguard podcast, the companion show to the written publication available on Substack. I am Nick Knoth, your co-host. I am joined as always by my co-host, David Lyle. David, good morning.
Good morning, Nick. And I know that it has been a short night for you and a short night for our third member of this hosting crew. You all, more power to you for staying up to the end of the meeting last night. I checked out after a certain amount of time.
That's reasonable. Well, with
I
that,
did not.
with that, our guest co-host, which is actually our very first reoccurring guest, if you will, is Nick Foster, Councilman Nick Foster from Ward 4 and
Do I
Mayor
get a
Pro Tem.
certificate of some kind?
We'll give you a firm handshake.
We'll provide you some boxing tape
We're actually
for your U-Haul
Ooh,
boxes.
That would
are
be
there.
fabulous. Thank you.
We're actually coming in live from his kitchen table. He was kind enough to invite us over, put on some tea, and we're going to talk about some tea from last night, I'm sure, because last night the council covered the public safety tax ballot question, as well as some surprise developments at the end of council and some things in between. But before we get to that, I just want to share for listeners that the reason why we invited Councilman Foster to come on the show so soon after having been on just a few weeks ago is, if you missed it, he has announced that he will be resigning from his role, from his seat as councilman for Ward 4, and moving east as his wife took on a new role that requires them to relocate.
Yeah.
Southeast.
Southeast.
Emphasize that south for an
Southeast.
Alabama guy.
Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah.
And we're not planning on having you on this soon. So anybody who says, "Gosh, you've given him 2 opportunities within your first half year,"
Well,
it wouldn't have happened unless you were moving.
we're going to give Nick the opportunity to get up earlier than he might otherwise after a night where he was at a council meeting until about midnight. Oh,
Da,
my.
dun, da, dun, da, da, dun, da, da. I want to start there because, for my money, that's the best thing I've seen at the council for a long time.
Well,
It was great.
I thought it was terrific.
Yeah, no, I loved it completely. There was, just for folks listening, last night during scheduled public comment, Richard, I'm blanking on his last name, Richard Harris, who's a local performer and actor, came out to speak in support of Midwest Studios, but he did so in full character as a Star Wars Imperial Trooper, joined by a chorus of Midwest supporters doing the Imperial March song or sound or whatever you might have. And I will say he delivered.
And using irony, because what his whole speech was not in favor of Midwest, if you listen to it literally,
Right.
Yeah.
which actually was in favor. It was terrific. Midwest has done a good job. And I think I saw on some report today, 15 times, 15 straight council meetings or something like that, they've had a member show up in support of Midwest. And what they're upset about is that the council has indicated they're not going to give them, the $35,000 that they have. And
Well,
they want more than that this year.
circle around
Yeah.
back to that, but I just want to say that Mr. Harris was in the starring role and the council was in a supporting role as representatives of the evil galactic empire. I'm trying to figure out just who I am. I think I'm Grand Moff Tarkin, so I'm in charge of the Death Star, I suppose.
Well, it was a good performance. I doubt if it changes the mind of the council. I don't know. Go back to what it.
Let's talk about that. This isn't a matter of the council changing our mind. What the Midwest is operating under an existing contract agreement, and that agreement ends in August. This is an agreement that came about really largely through the work of the staff and by the council's approval. Certainly, it kind of goes on from there. But my understanding is that there are ongoing conversations with staff about this. So it's not that the council decided we're not going to support Midwest anymore. It's that they're operating under a contract that ends, and they're asking for some sort of extension with that. And we're in the budgeting process right now. I think that there are ample opportunities, but I think they also have support on the council. I support them. I think that they do great work and it's important stuff, and we do need it in the community. The question is, how do you go about funding it?
Where do you see it now? Where do you see? Because I don't know whether I don't have the right cable system or streaming system,
Well,
but
I
mean,
don't.
it used to show up
Yeah.
some places. I mean, I would see it on some TV channel, some public funded TV channel someplace. I don't think that
Well, it
some of
was.
theirs.
It was the city channel, and
Yeah.
that's where that money went. And really, what it's come down to is that's not very it's not effective
It
anymore
is
there.
not.
Yeah,
And most people would post things like that on their social media or some
right.
other way. So I understand the argument of saying, why do we need this anymore? Although it does provide a creative space for people to
I
create
don't think
things.
we need that part of it anymore.
Hmm.
I think what we need is what they're doing in terms of provision of equipment and provision of training and access to, resources that a lot of people would not have otherwise.
Yeah.
And we've heard one story after another. It's compelling. I
Yeah.
think um, that as I said, there's a lot of support, I suspect, on the council. We haven't talked about it in depth, but honestly, it's not time to do it yet.
I would
And
just
that time
say
will come, I'm sure.
I just say that that was a terrific highlight of the meeting last night. I think they did a really good job of
Well, then
preparing that.
you need to go and look. There are a couple of videos they produced also.
I agree with David that I think that was probably the best scheduled public comment I've ever seen in my near decade of following council.
Yeah.
And also the meeting only went downhill from there. So not to be too negative, but
Well, when they were done, about 90% of
It did.
those who were gathered for the meeting last night left.
yeah,
And there were only a few
just the
really through the
usuals in the
rest of the
crowd after
time.
that. But
Largely, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, with that, we can we can skip forward. One of the things that came up, and this is actually in your ward, if I'm not mistaken, is the storm drainage improvements
Yes.
around Fairview Road. Always a huge issue. Doesn't matter where you are in
Mm,
the city, frankly. And this was a $2.15 million improvement. Seemed like council approved it unanimously. There was no negative feedback from the public.
right.
So, anything you wanted to share on it?
Well, I would have loved to opined about it longer. I was so pleased to see it and to see that it's happening. I've heard about the stormwater drainage issues in that part of my ward since I was running the first time, and it's problematic for a number of reasons that largely have to do with when that roadway was put in. For one thing, you have a different guttering system there. There are these concave kinds of gutters instead of the usual curb and gutter that we're used to. And I think that has contributed to that. But over time, deterioration has taken place. And, before we started, Nick, we talked about how there are a number of things that we're having to catch up to as a city. That's one of them. And I did ask, are there plans to do some other things as well? And there are plans not only to address stormwater in other parts of that neighborhood, but also to address roadways. And this is we're getting into the kinda weeds with this, but, um, Public Works and utilities has to work together on this. Public Works doesn't want to mill and overlay a road and then have utilities come in and rip it all up so they can address sewer. So, sewer needs to come first, and then, Public Works will come in later to redo those roads. So I was really pleased to see it and, look forward for my constituents to more of that work being done in that same neighborhood.
Well, it's certainly one of those things, and I think this was also mentioned last night, where there's always a need for it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah.
great, and I think you yourself mentioned there's areas adjoining it, essentially in neighboring neighborhoods that could also use.
Well, stuff breaks. Stuff breaks, and you have to work on it, and the city's certainly no different than that. I think we're trying as hard as we can to keep up with it and really to catch up on some things.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of catching up on some things, another item that was of positive note was the reconstruction of Fire Station number 5, which for folks who live on the northeast side of town is right by the roundabout at Clark Lane and Ballinger Lane. It is one of the city's older buildings that, based off the staff's report last night, has had structural challenges due to settlement issues, and essentially they're going to rebuild it.
Right, they'll build alongside it, and then they'll take that one down. And that building is just older. It's over 50 years old, and I think there are problems related to where it was built and the kind of underlay that's there on the property. So this will be a good thing. And there are 2 other ones, and I hesitate to name which ones they are, but there are because I can't they're all numbered.
Mm.
So there are 2 others that need to be worked on as well, and so this will lead us, eventually into our conversation, I'm sure, about the public safety tax last night. But again, it's one of those things that we need to catch up on. Buildings need to be replaced, and this is one that will, and I'm very pleased about it.
And this is also on the heels of Fire Station number 10, which is out on the far east side of town,
Yep, on
coming
WW.
online in just a few weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and, that was there was a church that preexisted in that building there, and, when we were able to buy that property, I thought, "Wow, this is brilliant," and it was, and I credit Chief Farr, who was chief at the time, with, uh, carrying that through. So they've been working on the building, but there's more to be done, new construction that's gonna be done there, but they are gonna be able to go ahead apparently and open it, before the other construction happens, and that's great. We need that firehouse, and it would be good to see it open.
I think to your point, that is a perfect segue into everyone's favorite subject last night, which was the discussion of putting a public safety tax question on the ballot for the April 4th election
Yeah.
that would raise, or rather, that would set a new 1% sales tax dedicated to fire and police in terms of staffing, equipment, pensions, and we can get into what those numbers are, but you know, high level, Councilman Foster, it was a 2.5 hour discussion
Right.
around it. It ended in council tabling it in a split vote, mind you. You were one of the 4 who voted to table it,
Yeah.
and so we'd be, what are your thoughts on it? What led you to that conclusion? And we can go from there.
Well, I think probably I voted, and remember this vote took place late by that time, and not everyone is thinking as clearly as one might hope. I voted in part and influenced by my colleagues. I think that there was a sense that they wanted to talk about it some more, and that there was a sense that the public might want to talk about it some more. And so I yielded to that, honestly. So that's why I voted the way I did. There's a lot to be said about the tax itself, and I'm not sure where we can start. But I think there's a need for it. And, I'm going to get tired of hearing myself say this. I may have already gotten tired of hearing myself say this, but in the last election, when I ran in 25 last year, I really came to the conclusion that I think our greatest challenge as a community is the rate of growth that we're experiencing as a community. And we talked about some infrastructure stuff just a few minutes ago. That infrastructure and public safety are probably the greatest uh, sore points in regards to that. How do you manage to keep up with that? And the stark reality is that we have not kept up with hiring the number of firefighters and police officers that we need for a city our size. Let's just talk about the fire stations. We're hiring firefighters to be in Station 10. That means we've got to add them. We're looking at other fire stations down the road. I get kind of depressed when I talk to Chief Schaefer. He talks about everything else we have to do in the other stations that need to be built. But it's just a reality. We're growing. We're going to have to do these things, and the same applies to police. We are far behind where we should be in terms of our population with police. I think there's general agreement. I heard a little bit of disagreement with this last night, but I think the overwhelming agreement is that we need to have more police officers. We need to have more firefighters. The question is, how do we pay for it? And that's what it comes down to. I think that very often we talk about things at city council and otherwise in the city, and some of our citizens might think, why don't you just do that? Well, as a council member, one of your primary responsibilities is fiscal. You've got to be sure that you pay for the things that you're going to do. And we want to be sure that we're covering the needs of the community in terms of the services that the community wants and needs. To do that, you just have to have money. So at this point, in terms of our revenue and looking ahead, and we talked about that some last night, there needs to be more revenue in order to do this. So that's essentially what we're talking about. There was an effort some years ago to pass another tax. It would be a property tax. I think it failed spectacularly. I was talking to someone last night, and to be honest, I don't recall it, but I'm pretty sure I voted for it because I honestly prefer property taxes over sales taxes. Property taxes are more progressive. Sales taxes are on their face, regressive. I don't like that. But we're going to experience some pain no matter what we do, no matter how we move forward on any issue. And I'm afraid this is probably going to be the pain we'll have to experience in order to um, reap the benefits of the revenue, the additional revenue that we've determined that we need.
If I Sorry, David, if I may, because you mentioned right there at the end the sales tax versus property tax, could you explain for listeners why the city went the path of sales tax versus property
I
tax?
think the largest reason is because we had the experience of a property tax failing. Property taxes are just notoriously very difficult to pass. And it's largely because the people who are property owners have a tendency to vote. So sales taxes are regressive because everyone pays it. That means that the burden of that falls mostly on those who are at the lower end of the income spectrum because they're spending more of their money on things that they absolutely need. People at the higher end of income spectrum are spending money too, and they pay the highest rates. Well, they're not the highest rates, but the highest amounts of sales taxes. But it's only because they're spending money on non-necessities and on desired goods. So that's the difference essentially.
So there wouldn't be other options, just to make it clear, there wouldn't be sales tax or property tax. Those are basically the two options you would have for funding something this big.
I'm not sure what other option there
Yeah.
is. I haven't heard anyone identify something
Well, somebody
else.
last night said grants, but I mean, that would
Well,
not work.
yeah,
That's not consistent and it's not enough. What grants are there out there? So
well,
I
we
just
need
wanted to,
this is gonna produce $38 million. I would love to have access to a grant that would come close to that.
and that
Well,
would not
consistency.
expire or
Yeah,
sunset in
right.
3 or 5 years.
Right.
And this would be a tax that would be added. It's different than because there is a fraction of a percent sales tax right now that goes to Parks and Recreation, but it has to be renewed every few years. And I thought the
sunsets.
argument against having a deadline or an end date for this tax is a good argument because you wouldn't have to want to go through this for public safety every 5 or 10 years. That would be a headache and a half, I think.
I think our police chief and our fire chief do a really good job of being even-handed and straightforward with their comments during council. I have to say, in that moment, looking at their faces, I thought, "Wow, they do not think this is a good idea."
Mm-mm.
And that's only because I know them that I was able to discern that. I think this would be a really bad idea because it would say to people who you're hiring, "You might have a job
Mhm.
in a few years, and you might not. It just depends."
I thought that a couple of things. One was somebody said, we want to know how this money was going to be spent. Well, I think that it comes out. I
It's
mean,
in
that is
the
part of that. If it was passed, that's part of how you know the money is going to be spent. And the other thing is, it's like Parks and Rec does a good job of saying, here are the projects we want. But before they do each one, they bring it back to
right.
council. So if there was something that was going to be questioned, the council would have to approve everything that this money was going to be spent on. So that should be no longer an issue
Well,
asking that question.
and I can give examples for the three main things we're talking about in terms of addressing pension. There'll be recommendations. There'll be conversation about exactly how much we do over any particular time period. That conversation will take place among various bodies within the city, and then it will eventually come to the city council, and the city council will have a public hearing that will be included in other things, I'm sure, but it'll be part of public hearings and public conversations in the council. The council will vote. The same thing applies to equipment that's going to be bought. There'll have to be items brought to council to say we want to designate this money now to buy this piece of apparatus and so forth. And the same thing again with salaries. That's true for all of the salaries of everyone who works for the city. The council signs off on all of those things, and the public has an opportunity to provide input on them.
So it's not like it's going to be in the dark.
No, not at all.
So then my other question would be then, what more information are you going to have on May 18th than you had last night on May 4th?
I'm not sure that we will. I think that when we talked about this at the end, I did note that I thought that's where it was headed, and I assumed that it would. And I encouraged the city to be involved in the educational process. In the meantime, I asked if there was a Be Heard page for this as an example. There's not right now. I hope they'll go ahead and do that, and then provide some of the information there.
The only other information, and this came out in the discussion also, that you might have in 2 weeks that you don't have now is what the state is going to do as far as replacing income tax
Yeah,
with
that's
sales
legitimate.
tax. But I thought that the city manager made a point there. So the city has to worry about what the city needs and has to have. You can't make your decisions for the best of Columbia based on what the state of Missouri has said it's going to do.
Right, and I'm hoping that plan, I think that's it's an ill-advised plan to eliminate the income tax in our state. And you want to start talking about regressive taxing, then you're just doing it in spades. Regardless of that, I think that, and I mentioned this last night, I think we need to trust the voters, and the voters hopefully are going to educate themselves about what each of these items would do. I can easily see someone coming in, and this is one reason we need to be very careful and intentional about educating. But I can easily see a voter going in, well, not that, but I'll go with this, even
Mhm.
though it's painful, and not that being the state
Right.
income tax, and recognizing the pain and the need, voting for the city tax.
You talked about the impact that this would have on families, and I thought there were some figures given last night.
Yeah.
How do you feel about saying, for example, a low-income family might have an additional $61 a year, a middle income might be $267, or I may have those numbers close, but not exactly right.
Well,
So how do you feel about that? And as telling people, here's how it would impact you, average family.
I have strong personal feelings about this, and I'm trying to be responsible in my response as a city council member. This is a cumulative issue. As we add sales taxes, it has a cumulative effect, and I can't help but look back on my experience when I was executive director at Voluntary Action Center, and I signed every check. Not every check, but every check copied. And I saw the amounts of money that people came in and needed. And I'll never forget signing one that was for $3 for a prescription. Most of us would think that $3 for a prescription is just, you'd be delighted to have that little amount of money and just say, fine. But for some people, it's a lot. And I think that every time we do this, we have to keep in mind that this adds a burden there. So even as we're doing this, as we support, if we support it, we need to keep in mind that there are people who will be impacted, and it is cumulative over time.
One of the things that was brought out yesterday or last night at the city council meeting also had to do with the growth of Columbia. And many people made comments about infrastructure and keeping up with that. And some people said we can't afford more housing developments and the things of that nature. And I understand that goes back to arguments that have been going around a long time. I guess my question is, if the city has grown 50% since 2000 or whatever the time was, I can't remember what it was, but there was something about a 50% growth. Have sales taxes grown 50%? And if not, why?
Get Matthew Liu to come on and talk about that. That's a question that remains in my mind, honestly. I think that yes and no, and it gets really complicated at that point. This is one reason that I like to have a finance department who can explain that kind of thing. I don't think I'm the person to explain it to you, and I'd feel a little irresponsible if I took a shot at it.
It's just frustrating because I think that is an ongoing question. I've asked the question before on a previous podcast.
Yeah.
It might have been with you when you were on before. I don't think growth pays for itself.
You may be right. Pregnant pause. You may very well be right about that, and I wonder about it as well. But the dynamics are frankly beyond my capacity.
This is something that the city manager pointed out, and you emphasized it also when people on the council were saying, we need more time to think about this. We need more time.
Yeah.
The city manager, I believe, made the point, and Nick Foster, you can help me out with this if I'm wrong on this, but he said, look, we've been talking about this for a year easily. And I thought your point was good because other entities, perhaps like the county, throws things into the mix all of a sudden.
Right.
And you wonder their motivation and you wonder why it's done at this point in time, other than to make those who are going to be considering this public safety sales tax for the city stumble in their answers. And
we've been talking about
response to
this
it.
for close to a year. And the way I put it is we've been on a pretty long runway to get to this. And, the county is, I understand it, the county has just in the past couple of weeks, maybe, decided that they're going to pursue this kind of tax. I highly value our relationship with the county, and it's critical that we have that relationship and that it be healthy. This is not helpful in that regard. And, to issue a press release 2 hours before the council is going to go into session to talk about this particular matter is disappointing. I'll use that word.
So what will that do for future relationships? Because I think your point is a good one, and I think it is a valid question. What's the motivation for doing that kind of timing, knowing what was on the city council's agenda last night was going to be the center key?
I'm going to give you the same answer I gave about the previous one. You need to talk to that person about it. And I think you would need to ask someone at the county to describe.
But my question is, what will it do for future county-city relationships?
Well, I guess that remains to be seen. We live in a period of time when there is so much anxiety, and I think all of us are feeling that. And a lot of that comes out as defensiveness. A lot of it comes out at anger, and a lot of times that anger gets directed at people and systems, even and institutions that are not responsible for the source of that anger and the source of that frustration. I think a lot of us are looking for targets, and honestly, we have got to get past that. And I mean that as a country. I mean that as a state. I mean that certainly as a local community. And one of the ways that happens is we have conversations with one another. And I will be looking in my limited remaining time for opportunities to have those conversations. And I believe that folks at the city are going to be looking for that as well. And I believe there are people at the county who want to have those conversations. We do have those conversations, and they're productive. And I think over the last couple of years, we've had very productive kind of not only conversations, but we've been able to take actions that have made a difference in the community. And I'll just point, it's of special interest to me, but I'll point to the housing study as a very good example of that. We did that cooperatively. We're meeting cooperatively on a regular basis to see that the recommendations for the housing study are moved forward. And I think that that holds great promise. So let's look to the strength of that relationship and
Well,
see if that can't help us in all the other areas
as
that
an
we're working
average
together.
citizen, I thought I understood that the city and county were working better together, but this seems like a step back. This seems like a shock saying, hey, maybe there are certain things there, other currents under the surface
I
that are not as cooperative.
I can see how you would see that.
Yeah. One other thing that I think, and I'll be quiet here in a moment. Nick, you can jump in and do what you need to do with our conversation. But I just want to make sure that it is clear. And I made the comment. The comment was made last night. The city council already budgets for public safety,
Right.
and so what is budgeted for public safety in the general budgeting process would not be impacted if if this tax passes, because it would still need to be part of the budget for public
Right.
safety.
This is essentially additional revenue to pay for additional services.
So one of the things that happened last night, again, this was a long conversation that as a side issue didn't necessarily need to be that. It could have moved faster, as I'm sure you'd agree yourself. You even commented on such a thing, essentially saying we can all see this is moving towards being tabled. Perhaps let's move in that direction. But one of the amendments that did come through was, and Nancy Thompson, the city's attorney, drafted the language, which, and this is for listeners, because this was kind of done on the fly, I don't have the official drafted language. I just have what I heard and wrote down,
Yeah.
which was, as
I haven't seen it either myself.
yeah.
So yeah.
Which as I wrote it down, it says, if approved by voters as a part of the annual budget process, the city manager shall deliver a report to the council on the revenues and expenditures of the proceeds generated by the sales tax. The sales tax in question being the public safety tax. That was something that was pushed forward by a segment of the council. It was approved 6-1 with Christina Hartman opposing it. Seemingly, my interpretation of that was because there wasn't a mandatory audit function involved in it, I think.
You'll have to ask her.
Yeah, it was that
I
part was unclear to me.
yeah, I don't know,
Mhm.
and I will just say that I trust our city management. I trust our administration. I trust our finance department. I know there are disputes about certain things related to our finances. I get that, and I'm listening to that, and I'm learning from that. I did not share a concern about reporting back on this money. We'll see this money reported in the same way we do everything else, and I'll tell you, in preparing for, my leaving, I'm going through a lot of paperwork that I've collected over time, and I'm turning in some binders that I've kept over time. And just take a look at the budget itself. If you just the document itself, it's a massive document, and all the numbers are there, far more than I can absorb. But if you want to look at a granular level about where the money is going and how it's being spent, you can look at the budget and you can see the reports that come from the budget and you can see it. So I really didn't see a need to ask for any kind of additional reporting on that.
Well, and Matthew Liu, the finance director, also noted, and I think city manager DeCarlo Seawood reiterated as well, that the city already does an annual audit
Yeah,
of all of its budgeting and all of its expenditures,
right.
and that this would be a part of that, as anything else would.
Exactly.
And essentially, to your point, at the end of the day, everything in the city budget is signed off on by city council. It
Correct.
has to come to city council for the approval in terms of spending those dollars.
That is correct.
So it's hypothetically, it could happen that the tax passes, the funds are raised, and council has an issue with it, and they don't spend the money. Right? Council could
Yeah.
deny expenditures, for example. Right? Again, just hypothetically, like there is checks and balances.
Well, that's true. It could be denied, but highly unlikely in this case. And I think that with this public safety tax, there are a couple of differences about it. It's not like Parks and Rec tax. That's a separate fund altogether. This money will be nested within the general fund, and but will be specified for those purposes. And even though it's in the language that this would be true, we were still asked, and there were a couple of people who raised this, I think, as a concern, an understandable concern, but we just went over this, that in the budgeting process and the reporting process, we'll see it on the front end and on the back end, and in between, we will see things come to council for approval.
Yeah, and I guess my point is more so the dollars are restricted, and so if Police Chief Jill Schluty in the next budget cycle after this passes came to council and wanted something, I'm trying to think of something that wouldn't have an official police air balloon, blimp, right? It's like
Do council members get
yeah,
to ride?
something frivolous or something that the council could deem like, oh, that seems like a poor use of city funds in this case.
Right.
Council has the right to deny something.
Absolutely.
Right, is my point that regardless of what the item is, that power still lies with council.
Absolutely.
Well, it's tabled to May 18th. Anything else you want to say before we leave this? We'll be back on it in 2 weeks, and I think as we suggested, I doubt much will change.
I think we're gonna hear a lot of the same things on the 18th.
I think you will also. And then the other part of the conversation was looking at the timing of what will happen at the state and Governor Kehoe when he has a chance to sign off on a bill that would eliminate the income tax and replace it with the sales tax, something about May 26th. And I thought it was wise. I think the Sheila Amin, she made the comment and said, hey, let's do this on May 18th. And then if you need to have a special session, you can do another one by the 26th because
Right.
the 26th is your deadline, I guess, for getting this on an August ballot.
Yeah, and look, I wanna circle back to it a little bit. I understand the concern about what's happening on the state level and the impact that would have on us. I understand it, and I understand the hesitation about it. I think it's in front of us. It's a part of what's going to happen, and we need to be focused on what we're doing locally. But I get the concern. I don't. It's not that I don't share it at all.
Yeah. Well, my only hope for the May 18th meeting is that since we already spent 2.5 hours discussing it, that won't take 2.5 hours.
Yeah, you're from your lips to God's ears. I think most people would agree.
My hope is that Richard Harris comes back as something else and will make his point about this in a good, creative, entertaining way.
Well, pivoting to a completely different subject, as often is the case on council meetings, the definition of family when it comes to zoning by the city was brought up last night. For context, the city council had directed staff to pursue to explore redefining and perhaps the general need for defining family in zoning, something that had not changed in, I think, since the 60s. Is that accurate?
I think that's right. There were references as far back as 1935.
Yeah. And this was a result ultimately of the housing study that was done in 2024. This is one of the many recommendations came out of it. Planning and Zoning Commission worked on it, redefined and expanded in terms of being like kind of more generous in what counts as family for folks in terms of sharing a household. That came to council last night. Council ultimately withdrew it from consideration, didn't vote on it, didn't table it. Councilwoman Valerie Carroll of the First Ward, former Planning and Zoning Commissioner herself, I would say led that effort in terms of having kind of dissatisfaction with where Planning and Zoning took it. I think she, and clearly some common ground with her council members, and we'll get your opinion here in a moment, Nick, perhaps was more interested in doing what the county did, also based off the same housing study, and then instead perhaps essentially do away with defining family as a whole or just shy of doing so.
Yeah, and some of the conversation last night was what difference between the county and the city in this regard, and the reasoning behind what staff brought and what planning and zoning provided. And I want to note that planning and zoning sent this to us at an 8-0 vote, so it did go on consent for that reason. And was withdrawn so it could be talked about, which I supported withdrawing it just so we could have this conversation. And the reason behind doing it, both for the city and the county, is to broaden opportunities for greater density within housing in our city, to limit the limitations a little bit. It's just that the county went further with that, and they went with the International Property Maintenance Code, which can we just say the international code from this point forward? The IMPC or
EMC.
Yeah. See, let's just call it the international code, which is a cap, and it got pretty. Again, we're into a whole lot of details that took a little while, and I don't think we've got time, and I don't know that I've got the energy to retread all of that. But a part of it too was just, how do you define family? And there are people who believe that we should just remove the definition of family altogether. Clint Smith, our director of planning, said that it's important to define it so that you can define what it's not. And at least that's what I understood him to say. I would rather that we didn't have a definition of family within the code myself. And I think that family, it's a social cultural issue, and this kind of thing shows up in your code. That's important, and we want to be able to recognize who people choose as their families as their family, and be careful that we don't limit who that can be. But the idea behind it altogether is that it just makes it possible for a little bit more density in the units that we have in town. The biggest issue of contention is we're a college town. We have a lot of college students who live in apartments and otherwise, and they can get pretty dense there. The impact this would have on infrastructure, parking was used, but I think you can talk about streets and all the other things that are related into a particular area.
As an average citizen, that's the point. I tried to read the preparation material on this, and I eventually just punted because I said, this is way too complicated. I understand the importance of recognizing non-traditional family units. I get that.
Yeah.
I'm progressive in the idea that families are not what I grew up in as my family. However, I can point to a place right over here, over my right shoulder, on the corner of Garth and Crestmere, that is a rental house. And a few years ago, there were 7 or 8 college students living in there, and they would have parties and they would have other activities. Parking was part of it, but just the overall. So as an average citizen, I felt like we need to have some sort of way of saying when things got out of hand, you know what? There are 7, 8 people living here who are unrelated that are causing a disturbance in an otherwise residential neighborhood.
Mhm.
That to me was the issue here, not the other part, although it became the other part that was the overwhelming consuming issue here.
Yeah, I had a similar experience in Bloomington, Indiana before we moved here, and that was related to actually 2 different houses that were immediately adjacent to the home that my wife and I lived in. So I understand that concern, and part of what some people are saying is the way that we deal with this is we deal with noise ordinances
Right.
and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
I think that as we were having this conversation last night, though, I realized that our ordinances have a limiting effect. We can't really enforce all of our ordinances absolutely. In the case of the experience I had in Bloomington, I talked with the people of concern that lived across the street from me. I was told that they would take my concerns into mind, and of course they did not. So I eventually called the police, and I eventually all of that activity in that house stopped. But I'm pretty sure it's because the police showed up one last time and said one more time, and you're going to be in big trouble. I don't know that for a fact, but I know it stopped. And that's not the way we want to live, and it's not the way we want to enforce. But there's a limitation. We were just talking about the number of police that we have. I would love to see more traffic enforcement in this city, but it doesn't all get done in a way that we would all be fully satisfied with, at least. That's not the fault of the police. And I think that we need to keep this in mind too. But it's important what we put in the code. It's important what we have in the ordinances. It tells what we value.
What I did in a particular situation with that event was after a party, and there was trash and beer cans and beer bottles strung all the way down the street. As I collected everything that they had thrown out, put it in a pile in their driveway with a note and said, many of us live here as families, and this is our neighborhood that we're going to permanently live in. We don't appreciate your
Wow.
noise and you trashing our neighborhood. And it stopped.
Okay.
There you go. Hey, if it works, thank you for picking up the trash. I think
As a member of this neighborhood also, I thank you for
yeah,
that.
I think it also something that Nick here alluded to is that when folks are thinking of whether or not the city should have an ordinance for X, Y, or Z, oftentimes, as has happened in recent discussions with other ordinances, like the pedestrians in the median,
Mhm.
right, which is what city staff need is something to enforce in these unusual circumstances where they need something.
Right.
Right. And it goes back to that discretion that CPD has discretion. I suppose if they wanted to, like anything, right, they could go extreme in terms of enforcement. That seems unlikely to occur for a variety of reasons. It's
Right.
the same thing here where Bill, I always mess up his last name,
Retire.
Ratah, the director of neighborhood services and housing, pretty much said that last night, right? It's like, this is about these circumstances that don't pop up regularly, not even once a year, even.
Right.
But in those scenarios, you need something to enforce. You
Right.
can't just say stop.
Right.
Right, there has to be a stick that gives you the authority to do something about it.
Right.
Ultimately, that's why this exists, and now it's going back to Councilwoman Carroll with the support of council, had this sent to the Disabilities Commission, the Human Rights Commission, Am I missing one? I think it's going back to planning and zoning.
Well, there was a member of planning and zoning there last night who said, "No," you know, and I understand the reasoning behind, getting that kind of input, but this goes back to what I said a while ago. I don't wanna beat a dead horse, but I wasn't able to read the minutes because they don't exist of the work sessions that planning and zoning did on this issue. They had long conversations about it. Planning has put a lot of time into this, so it's not like it hasn't been vetted at all. Disabilities and human rights uh might have an opinion about it, and I'd be happy to hear it. At the very least, it's gonna delay us getting down the road and making a decision on it.
I'm sure we'll all look forward to seeing what comes of it in 6 months or whenever that happens.
Yeah.
Skipping forward to really in my opinion, the last issue of the night that I want to get to before we spend a little bit of time on your forthcoming exit is at the end of the council meeting during public comment or council comment after public comment. This was after 11:30. A councilwoman, Vera Elwood, out of Ward 2, which is Northwest Columbia,
Mhm.
presented a binding arbitration ordinance. We have no language for that because she popped that on council last night. It's an ordinance that she drafted with the assistance of the local labor union and a outside attorney that she engaged, I suppose, or that they engaged, and brought this to council. Seemed like it surprised most people, although certainly not everyone. Pretty much proposed it to get a public hearing on it,
Mhm.
is the direction it went. Passed in a 4-3 vote with Mayor Buffalo, yourself, and Councilwoman Peters opposing it, certainly on the grounds of this is the first you'd heard of it was at 11:30 last night, and staffs hadn't, of course, also not had any opportunity to vet it or read it in any way. That was, I'll say it, very atypical, very unusual. I don't remember the last time ever seeing something like that occur. There was clear contention and frustration on the dais across all the council members with what was happening, how that was presented. It passed 4-3 again, so it's going to get a public hearing. No one in the public's ever seen this document. Staff hasn't seen this document.
Let's go back to what the document is asking for. First of all, arbitration. So that means that if the city was
Binding
binding
arbitration.
arbitration, they were negotiating with the firefighters union or some other union, and they didn't agree that it would go to a third party for them to decide.
And
That's
and
basically what this is
and
talking
the
about?
third party's decision would be binding.
Right. It's kind of like arbitration. Many people would think of it more in a sports event, like where you've got ownership and you got player management or player representation. They can't agree on a salary. They say, we will agree to binding arbitration. They go to an arbitrator, that arbitrator's decision. That's what this is. But it would be between unions and management.
Yes,
Okay.
and as I understand it, there is already arbitration. There are occasions when the administration and one union come to a place where they're having a problem moving on, and there is an outside arbitrator that's brought in to do that. But their decision is not binding. The decision is still the city managers. I don't want to get into a conversation about binding arbitration
Right.
here. That's a rabbit hole that
But that's what
we've
this is.
explored before, and the unions have asked for it a lot. The issue here is not, frankly, about that in my mind. The issue is about what the process is for bringing that forward and what happened last night. And I look forward to having a conversation with my colleague Vera. What we're opening the door here to is ordinances in full form being introduced outside the confines of the organization itself. This hasn't gone past legal to get an opinion there. Uh, how is this the way we want to do things? I for one do not.
And I think that's a good point. And the thing I'd like to do is to go back and to see the four who supported this and see what they have said in past comments as city council members on needing more preparation, needing more transparency, needing more information prior to having things sprung upon the council.
Right.
And I would probably be safe to say that many of those who voted for this have said in the past, oh, we need more time. Oh, we need more transparency. We need more openness in this process. And that's hypocritical.
I can see your point. I want to be gentle with my fellow council members.
Oh, come on, you're going to leave in a month.
Yeah, I still look. I am going to leave in a month, and I'm going to leave caring deeply. Um,
Yeah, and we know
Well,
you will just because of the person that you are, and maybe this is a good transition. I mean, it's frustrating, but what was done last night was done, and now in the future, it'll be a public comment.
and I just want to add a couple things on the subject, which is one, just to be clear for folks, this was not something that was done like, oh wait, I almost forgot about this, right? This was something that was clearly orchestrated to occur in this way.
Yeah, I think so.
The special interest groups who helped draft this ordinance that was put up like this showed up for this occasion. And the other part of this that I'll remind folks of, regardless of you, in this case, right, labor unions as the special interest group, love them, hate them, irrelevant. There's a million types of special interest groups. And so to me, one of the questions is, do you as a citizen, do I as a citizen want special interest groups? Think of the ones you love, think of the ones you hate, to have that influence and that ability to hand a council person an ordinance and say, "Introduce this," without giving anyone else input.
Right. And we have a process where which council members can let other council members know what they intend to do at the end of a meeting. That we send in questions to staff, and included in that are items that of if you're it depends on what your final comments are. Comments about I was going to do last night and I decided against it. I would have loved to have talked about some things that I've been to recently that are very positive about our community, and I think are hopeful and beneficial. But in the interest of time, I didn't talk about that. But the idea is to send if you do plan to do something where you're going to ask for a report or something like that, then we're asked to let council and staff know that that's coming. That did not happen in this case.
So again, it's not the point of binding arbitration. It's not the point of unions and their power. It's the process. It was how it was done.
It is process, and we can get stuck in process. There's no question about it. It can be maddening, but there is a process to everything, and we have to make determinations about how we're going to go about it.
It's what's been said before. When you are asked to make quick decisions on something that comes sort of out of the blue, sometimes you make bad decisions.
Well, and it was a 4-3 vote last night. I think if we were to take that vote again, it might turn out differently, because I really don't know who on the council knew or didn't know that this was coming. I know I didn't. I know Barbara didn't. I know Betsy did not. I don't know about anyone else. I really don't. But my guess is at least one or two other people were surprised. And so, thought, well, for whatever reasons, thought this is a good thing to talk about. And it was the very last item we took up in business. That's not a good time to do it.
There is wisdom in age and experience. And if
you and I would say that.
Who you just mentioned on the council who balked at this were your most experienced aged people on the council.
True.
We talk about you now. Is that what we're going to do now, Nick?
Age and experience.
I was going to say, speaking of age and wisdom, Councilman Foster, you have, what is it, 3 meetings left if we're counting this council retreat?
Yeah.
Well, actually 4 in that case. There are 4 meetings left of the council. There's a off Monday meeting now too.
Oh, that's right.
You have to get used to that rhythm too.
So with that in mind, you're exiting. You served 1 full term before this, just finished serving your first year of your second 3-year term. So you've been 4 years total. That was a convoluted way for me to present that.
Yeah.
You've been 4 years in.
Yeah.
You're walking away for the best of your family and going on to new and exciting adventures. I would ask, 2 things to keep it short for yourself and our listeners is, one, what is your biggest takeaway from having served on council compared to what you thought about Columbia before serving? And then for the many people, many dozens who will be interested in running to fill your seat, what is your advice to them?
I guess responding to the second part of your question is informed by the first part. I think that going into the service on the council, I brought some experience of with the city. I was funded by the city. I attended meetings for various and sundry reasons. I watched relatively closely. Coming onto the council, I think my experience and my largest single takeaway is probably what many people experience. There's a lot more to this than I thought. And, I really encourage citizens who are interested in this at all to be a part of the Citizens Academy and to go through that 6-week period. This is a common thing that is heard from people who, at the end of that, say, I had no idea about what the city did, all that the city does, all that goes into doing that, and the impacts that it has. And, it's been an incredible learning experience for me, and I'm very grateful for that. So and then that things are more complicated than they appear. I think I knew that too, but I discovered even more. There are so many nuances to the decisions that are made and to the things that the city does. So that's a big one. So I would say to someone who's coming in, I think it's an advantage if you have a degree of understanding about how the city works. I would really encourage people who are running to be wide open to learning more about that and to gaining an insight. And one of the things I think that Barbara brings to this job is her experience working for the city. There's no question in my mind. I see it over and over and over again. That's an advantage in terms of understanding the functions of the city and just the way things happen. And it's a boon to us as a community, honestly. So not everybody can have that experience, but I do think it really makes a difference. But mostly it's be open, listen, pay attention, and also listen to your constituents. The nicest thing about the job for me very often is just putting people together with the solution they need, which largely is sending them to staff and saying, "Can you look into this?" But it's very satisfying when somebody has an issue close by to their home, and I can send that to staff. They respond, and it resolves that issue. Doesn't always resolve it because some issues just can't be resolved easily or right away. But that's very satisfying. It's challenging work. It takes a lot of time, and people need to be realistic about that too.
Can I ask a real quick 3 questions? One is, do you ever have just an inkling of regret saying, I wish, what was I thinking when I
Yeah,
decided it?
sure. Yeah.
Okay. The other one is, as things shape up or not shake up, but shake out before
Mhm.
the August 4th election to replace you, as you see who steps up and says, I'm running for that, would you ever consider endorsing
Sure,
somebody?
I'll consider it, but I think I like the way that Ian Thomas did this when I was running. He didn't make it an endorsement, but he did say, "I'm going to vote for
Uh-huh.
so and so." I won't be able to do that because I'll be gone by that time.
And then the other question is, how many years have you and your family lived here? In
16 years.
16 years. In the many places that you've lived during your
Yeah.
life, how will Columbia fit into the overall scope of your life? What in
Ooh.
this chapter, what will it be like compared to the others? Sorry. Has to be good because you've had such good neighbors.
Well, you know what? That is part of it. We love our house. We love our neighborhood. We love our neighbors. I know everybody.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to do some editing. No,
I think the emotion is
he's
good.
gonna
I
miss
mean,
his former.
it would be better than you just saying, "I can't wait to get out of here."
That's right. He's gonna miss his former council colleagues.
That too. That one of the things that I've commonly said when people ask me about living in Columbia, and this comes from people back home. Uh, what's Columbia like? How do you like it? I always say it's a great place to live. It's just too far from family.
Yeah.
And that's been the only real drawback when you think about this. People move back here and there's reason for that. I don't know how many conversations I've had with people who said, well, we were here, I went to school here, or I worked here for a while, or I went somewhere else and we decided we didn't like it there as much. So we moved back, or I retired and we moved back, or I wanted to just come back to Columbia and I found a job here. I mean, that story is repeated over and over and over again. And there are so many reasons for that. But
Just for people to understand, where do you have family?
in Alabama,
Yeah.
mainly. My older son is in North Carolina. I'm gonna be sort of equidistant between them.
Yeah. And
And
that
I've got
makes
a
that
grandchild coming in August. It just thrills me to death knowing I can just run over.
makes a difference. And it's funny because knowing you from Alabama, and the reason I made the joke about the neighbors and neighborhood is because I am Nick's neighbor. So I was
Right.
just saying he's
In
got great
in
neighbors.
with full disclosure.
And the other thing is that I think that you don't have that Southern accent that I would expect all the time. I mean,
Yeah,
I hear
well
some of it, but
it's funny
not very.
when people ask me where I'm from and I say from Alabama, then they say, "Oh, I thought I recognized."
That's not real thick.
Yeah, and look, I wanted to point out one other thing. We're not leaving because we want to leave Columbia. Not at all.
Right.
My wife Candace is an amazing human being and a very talented person, and she has an incredible opportunity at Georgia State University, which is in the heart of Atlanta, and that's why we're moving. That's why we came here. She came here for a job at Mizzou, and so that's the reason we're going. There are benefits to it in terms of family and that kind of thing, but we had no intention of moving. We weren't looking for this opportunity. I mean, as recently as a year ago, we were looking at doing some construction on our home. We had a solar panel array in the backyard at some expense. I had run for council with every intention of serving the entire term. So we are not running away from Columbia by any means, and this place is going to continue to hold a very special place in our hearts.
Last question. What's the number one place restaurant-wise that you're gonna miss?
Oh,
You can only choose
that's
one.
not okay. I'm gonna choose one
Yeah.
because it's I can walk there,
Okay.
barred out.
Oh, I need
Barred
to
Yeah,
out.
see.
but there are other places. Sycamore is closing, and my wife and I just had lunch there the other day. I'm like, oh man! But you can go down again. We're talking about rabbit holes. That there are a number of great places to eat in this town.
Absolutely. Well, Councilman Foster, Mayor Pro Tem Nick Foster, thank you for coming on the show. And on behalf of the people of Columbia, thank you for serving our community. I know, and I think we all know to some extent, but never as much as the ones and families who are around you. There is a cost to it, to your mental health, your family health. I do think that you left Columbia better than you found it. So thank you.
Thanks.
Stay a Royals fan.
And
I'm wearing the hat right now.
and for our listeners, as
I've
always,
also got a Cardinals fan though. I like them both.
for our
You'll be a
listeners,
Braves fan next.
Well, I have a Braves hat.
I'm not surprised.
as always, I should say I'm a Cardinals fan, first of all. But go to ComoVanguard.com, submit questions for the show, find the written publications, support the podcast, et cetera, so on. This has been the Como Vanguard podcast. I'm Nick Knoth, my co-host David Lyle. Thanks for listening. Leave a 5-star review. Send this to your mom. We appreciate it. Thanks.